Good evening. It's Katie Gilmer with the FAA safety team. We are going to get started here. It's 8 o'clock. And tonight's topic, I see a couple of people who have been here throughout the week, but tonight's topic was going to be the Department of Natural Resources. We'll chat briefly about package delivery, but we're going to focus mainly on DNR. So welcome back. It is National Drone Safety Awareness Week with the FAA. I am part of the FAA safety team, which is a group of volunteer pilots that work to do outreach and education through the FAA's programs. So we will, the format of today, I have just a couple of slides up front kind of talking about the week, and then we're going to switch over to, we have a pre-recorded segment from the Department of Natural Resources here in Minnesota. And we will switch over to that video, which is about 11 minutes long, and then come back for a few safety points, and then we'll do Q&A. So, Drone Safety Awareness Week. We are highlighting key sectors of the drone community. I forgot to cross off the ones we've already done, but we started off with Monday with public safety. We had a law enforcement officer talk with us. Tuesday was business photography. Last night we talked agriculture, and tonight we're going to talk natural resources. Tomorrow night, Friday night, is our last event for the week, and we have one of our local school districts here in Minnesota that is going to talk about their drone program. In addition to highlighting the key sectors, we have a few safety initiatives we're going to talk about, and then hopefully get you some resources to connect to pilots out in your community. This event was canceled. If you signed up for the Saturday fly-in, unfortunately we had to cancel it. There ended up being a conflict. We will reschedule it, maybe for the spring. It's getting a little cold here in Minnesota. So the Saturday fly-in is canceled. The notice went out. We will reschedule it when we can. So I'm going to switch over to the video and get it going here. So this was pre-recorded with the DNR. Some folks have reported it's been skippy in the past. So if it is, just close your eyes and imagine you're here in sunny Minnesota and listen to the audio. But here we go. Let's switch over.
Hi, my name is Tyler Obermoller, and I work for the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources in the wildlife farmland region. This past spring, we decided to start a pilot study using drones to locate fawns in wildlife management areas in south central Minnesota. Previous techniques of locating fawns use opportunistic ground captures. So you take out a lot of volunteers and technicians to these grassland areas, forested areas, and you grid search the area and to attempt to locate fawns. So we're trying to use less volunteers, less staff, and also improve our speed because when you're doing the opportunistic ground captures, you're essentially just going out there and walking all this time. So it's also very strenuous physically. Use the thermal imaging camera to locate the fawns in these grassland areas, and then we'd switch to an RGB camera to confirm that it was actually a fawn and not a coyote. We saw birds, raccoons, all kinds of animals. This drone, especially with the thermal imaging, worked really well under low light and night conditions. When it was really sunny out, it did become difficult to locate these fawns, but overall we had really good success, and we are planning on using again this next upcoming spring. And we're really excited to use them again and hopefully increase our sample size and locate a lot more fawns and put out a lot more colors. So yeah, we're really excited for the future of drones.
So I'm Jennifer Corcoran, and I'm with the DNR Division of Forestry's Resource Assessment Program, and I'm their Remote Sensing Program Consultant. The DNR has historically used manned aerial photos for decades, black and white, stereo, color stereo, and now we have a regular cycle for collection of stereo peak fall color. We can take that information, subtract where we know the ground is, and then very reliably have a height of a tree or height of a stand of trees. That information helps us as foresters decide where to do our management efforts, but also monitor and assess the status and the health of the forest. Sometimes that resolution with the manned aircraft, as great as it is is still just a little too coarse for us, and for certain reasons. So if a tree or a group of trees is defoliating or losing its leaves for some reason or another, we might want a closer look, a literal closer look with a higher resolution, but also be able to come back and frequently check that area in a way we can't do with a manned aircraft. That would cost way too much money. So they're complementary technologies, that's for sure, the manned and unmanned. For example, if we see that there's an outbreak of an insect or a disease, we may be able to watch it and mitigate for that problem. So far, we have used UAS to explore forest inventory metrics. So things like height, I mentioned canopy size, closure, how many trees there are within a given area, providing a lot of really great imagery to help navigate around a site and assess the best place to put a road or a best place to put a landing or avoid a landing if there is going to be some management done there. Let's say there's a wetland, but it's tucked away and harder to see on an aerial photo from a manned aircraft. The drone imagery might be better for that. Fires. So being able to go out to an area we know had a fire, we can come back to it later and assess whether there is a hot spot still or not using thermal cameras. So that has been a successful use of drones at DNR. We've also used drones to assess management techniques for preparing a site to plant new trees. So some tree species need a lot of site prep in order to be successful in regenerating that tree species. There's a few different techniques that we've used and tried, and the drone project that we used to explore this did a control area and then an area where we did treatment. After trees have been planted, we go and we do regeneration checks in about 5 or 7 years, depending on the tree species after the planting, to check how many trees are living and how many there are per acre in that stand. So we've been exploring the use of drones because of the higher resolution available, and also the intriguing part of being able to come up with a 3D model of those stems. About 300 feet above the ground, we can draw profiles across that area and kind of count some of these stems, and it's actually been pretty cool and I think quite useful and a lot easier to see each of these stems, and the resolution is just incredible. And so I'm very excited about the future of being able to integrate this scale of technology with what we get with manned aircraft, both photography and things like LiDAR. And it's also really exciting because we need to be able to kind of deploy and move some of these monitoring techniques fast and at a more local level than we can with a helicopter or a manned aircraft to monitor those wildlife species. We are all excited about the possibility, and perhaps this is the solution we've been waiting for native plant communities or other types of monitoring for invasives or sensitive features that we would otherwise not be able to address at all. I like being able to get links to the data as fast as the contractor is able to get them to me, and being able to just go online to the cloud and play around and see, okay, yes, this site worked out well, and or I like this part of it, but I don't like this part, and being able to much more quickly. When we are flying drones, or we have contractors flying drones on state parks or state forests or wildlife management areas or scientific and natural areas, we're very cognizant of not only the public and the perception of flying a drone, near them, but the wildlife that's there and the sensitive features that might be on the ground. And we are very cognizant of it, and we're also very concerned about making sure we do our due diligence planning before going out there and while on site. And in particular, regarding the use of drones around fires, this is a huge safety concern of ours. And we have a campaign that we share with the Forest Service, and that is drop the drone if you see a fire. Don't fly a drone. And we're, as staff, we're all well aware of that and would adhere to that policy. So pretty much every mission I've ever witnessed, there's been some sort of bird of prey in the air near the drone. It hasn't landed or made us land the drone every time, but almost every time. And so having an observer with the pilot, maybe multiple observers, is key for the safety of the drone mission, but also that wildlife that live. We're in their space right now, and don't want to risk the wildlife's life and their safety, but also the drone and the equipment. So for the public flying drones on state lands, whether in the forest or the park, always use the same. We suggest we always use the same message, and that's not to fly over people. Check for policies. Check for how close you are to airport. All of those normal FAA rules. Checking for policies, though, on state lands, I understand can be probably overwhelming. We don't always know where to look. DNR Info Center is a place to call or email ahead of time. I think that the level of interest is really high right now. Maybe a few years ago, there were folks on both sides of the fence, and I think these days we're all kind of largely on the same page, that this technology makes sense for most applications, not all, and that it can be a tool in our toolbox. It'll probably take some time to build up an internal program where we're actually owning our own drones and flying with our own pilots, but we are on that cusp. In another few years, we'll look back and not regret that we did move forward into this technology. I look forward to someday training as a pilot myself and being able to integrate this kind of work in my career. It's really exciting, and it's something I always wanted to do. I never thought I'd be able to do it in the capacity I have today, but I'm very hopeful that it can be part of my career too.
Very cool. Thank you, DNR. So that was Jennifer with DNR. We pre-recorded that. They were not able to be with us tonight for the webinar. My day job is actually with DOT, and we are a sister agency to DNR, and I've worked quite a bit with them, so I can answer questions for Jennifer at the end of this next session. So we have just a couple of slides about FAA rules and regulations, some state information, some local information as part of our safety outreach and education. So this slide was in the video, so you probably saw it already, but there's 3 things you need to be a certificated pilot in the United States. The first one is your certificate, which is issued to the FAA. To get that, you have to take a test with some knowledge questions. Then you have to register your aircraft and then mark that registration on the exterior of your aircraft. And then I listed here the basic rules when you're flying drones. Of course, there's many pages behind this, but essentially stay below 400 feet. And I always talk about this 400-foot rule because it's important that most manned aircraft fly above 500 feet. That does not include helicopters and ag sprayers, but the average aircraft will stay above 500 feet. So if you're at 400 or below, that keeps a little buffer of safety in there. Your aircraft, including the payload, has to be less than 55 pounds. Stay within visual line of sight of your drone. do not fly over people. And then there's weather requirements. You have to have approval to fly in controlled airspace, and I'll talk a bit about that. And then there are special requirements to fly at night. So in terms of controlled airspace, the FAA has this program called LANCE, Low Altitude Authorization and Notification Capability. Essentially, it's an app. There's an app for that. You can download these apps. There's a number, the FAA provides the data, and then there's a number of companies that provide the front end, and the access to this is free. So you can download them. At the bottom right, by the FAA logo at the bottom of the slide, there is a link, faa.gov/UAS, and you can get more information on LANCE and look at who the suppliers are. But what this essentially does, it gives you information about whether or not you're in controlled airspace, and then it also gives you any special information for where you are at that moment, including these things called TFRs, temporary flight restrictions. And these temporary flight restrictions are in addition to the controlled airspace that's around, your average busy airport. They're things, they show up for things like major sporting events, fires, natural disasters, and also presidential and vice presidential travel. So this is going to become super important as we get closer to the 2020 elections, because the president, vice president, and other events will happen in places that don't normally have TFRs. So definitely make sure you're checking every time you fly. And this is just a little snapshot about controlled airspace. We are here in Minnesota, and in Minnesota there's almost 400 airports, and that includes seaplane bases, heliports, etc. Each one of these yellow circles is an airport, so it's important to understand where you are, what you're flying near, and what your requirements are for access to that airspace. Just like a manned aircraft has to request access to Minneapolis airspace or Flying Cloud or any of our larger airports, unmanned have to do the same. This is just a snapshot of one of those apps that will help you access that airspace. If you have questions about LANCE, feel free to email me. My name and contact information was on the invite for this webinar, and I'm happy to help you. So stepping over to Minnesota, there's a couple of folks on here from Minnesota. We do have some state statutes that are in addition to the federal regulations. In our state, you have to register your aircraft with the state. That's for manned and unmanned. And these state statutes actually backdate to the 20s. These were made for manned aircraft, and when drones came along and were labeled as aircraft, we kind of got pulled into those state statutes. We do have to insure our aircraft here in Minnesota. We also have to have a state commercial operator's license if you're going to be selling your services, and of course comply with all the FAA rules. There is a link there on the bottom of the slide to the DOT information. Again, my day job is with them, so you're welcome to email me if you have any questions. And anywhere you go, in addition to the FAA rules, there's also local ordinances that you need to follow. Here in Minnesota, MnDOT does keep a repository of those when we find them. We don't know everything that's out there, but we do our best, and when pilots let us know that they found one, we post it on our website. It is still the pilot's responsibility to check, and just like Jennifer noted in her video, sometimes it's difficult, so you might have to do a phone call instead of just looking online, but it's worth checking in advance. We do provide, MnDOT does provide assistance to communities that are looking to add ordinances so that we can help make sure that they make sense. There are a bunch of resources, so we really encourage pilots to get connected. There are lots of local flying clubs, both traditional hobbyists, recreational, like the AMA, and then there are also new groups, FPV flyers who race the little drones, commercial folks. We've got a really tight-knit group here in Minnesota. There are actually a lot of groups still on Facebook, so I know, I won't make a comment about Facebook, but definitely if you're on Facebook, take a look and see if you can find some local flying clubs there. FAA.gov/UAS has lots of information about drones, lots and lots of information. And then FAAsafety.gov is part of the FAA safety team, and that is where webinars like these are hosted. Here in Minnesota, we also somewhat frequently host drone seminars in person, fly-ins, and other events. So it's a great way to keep up to date. And then, of course, there's the aeronautics link. UAS inquiries. So if you have questions about drones, there are some really good resources through the FAA. Here in Minnesota, our local FSDO is a wonderful resource. They are the ones that kind of overseeing drones in our state. That is their phone number and email address. It's a bit long there, so I'll leave this slide up at the end. Great resource if you have questions. The National UAS Helpline is also great, and the National UAS email. I have used those, and they do respond to you, so feel free to contact them if you have questions. And then if there are drone complaints, and this does happen, you know, if people have a complaint about something happening, there is the hotline link to file a complaint. So that might be a good one to jot down as well. Oops. And that's it for questions. So I'll leave it here on the contact information. If you have questions for DNR, you can go ahead and post them in the in your control panel. There is a section for questions. So we've got a few of these, a few questions so far. So is DNR looking to increase the number of fawn surveys next year? So the one that they did this past year was a single event, and it was kind of a test case. So the interesting thing with fawns is they're fascinating. All fawns are born within like this week or 2 week period. And so DNR has to cover all the areas that they are doing research on within that period while the fawns are still small before they run away, because they're trying to put collars on them to, you know, make sure whatever they were doing, their health monitoring or something. So there's a very short period where they can do this work. From what I've heard, they are going to be doing more fawn surveys. I've also seen, like the U did some research with moose up in northern Minnesota doing a very similar study. Most of these right now are attached to research, but not all of them. Are they going to contract out the operations or do them themselves? DNR does not have aircraft yet. They, as Jennifer mentioned, they're looking at building out the program. Right now, they're contracting for a lot of this work. So they will not be doing them, as of right now, they're not going to be doing them themselves in the spring. If they're contracting, how can we get on the list of pilots they choose from? The first thing to do, if you're in Minnesota, even if you're out of Minnesota, when you register for your commercial operations license, you will show up on the Minnesota DOT's approved list of commercial operators. And there's no verification, validation, it's just have you paid your licensing fees or not. And if you have, then those are available on our website, and state agencies and everybody else checks that list to make sure that you are valid in our state. Some of them also shop off of it because you can list what services you provide. In terms of state contracting, become familiar with SWIFT, S-W-I-F-T. It's the acronym for the state procurement system, and that is where they would issue any requests for proposals. So that's where you'd find that stuff. Let's see, other questions? I can talk a little bit about how MnDOT is using drones. So we, and a lot of agencies are like this right now, both at the state, county, and local level government agencies. Initially, most agencies started out doing direct contracting. So they would find pilots in the state, they would run pilot programs, find out what the technology capabilities are, what the flexibility is. You know, we find a lot of things. You hire a contractor to go, for example, this fawn survey, and you expect it to happen one way. You know, the drone can cover 30 acres in 20 minutes, so you calculate out your time, and you can say we can cover this many acres in a day. Then you send the drone out, and you find out that, you know, weather is a greater factor than you imagined. As Tyler mentioned, the sun was an issue. We had a lot of sunny days during that period, which was unfortunately unfortunate because thermal, the readouts get messy when it's sunny. You can't, there's no differentiation between the warmth of a fawn's body and the warmth of the ground. So they learn a lot by contracting. And then some agencies, it's worth it for them to move on to then doing a mix of flying for themselves and contracting. And some find that there's too much variability in the work, and it just makes sense to continue contracting. And I think DNR and a lot of other agencies are evaluating that right now. Excuse me. And then beyond there, some agencies then go to full flight flight groups, and some continue the contracting mix. And it's an interesting mix of whether you're going to contract out the complex stuff or fly the complex stuff. So for instance, MnDOT's first foray into drones was complex. So they are photogrammetric office, which does the mapping for DOT, was one of the early adopters of drones back in 2016, and they fly very complex projects, which is not how everybody starts. So it really depends on the organization and what the work is going to do. Okay, do we have any other questions on DNR? All right. Oh, if you would like credit for this, Wings credit, please just post a quick credit please in the questions, and I will make sure to record your Wings credit. And I guess that's it for tonight. So we do have one more webinar again tomorrow night, and we will be talking about schools. So if you have kids in schools, or if you are interested in what your school could be doing or might be doing, it's a great way to connect. Also, the way this school started was through a company, actually myself. I reached out to the school and because they were nearby, and offered my expertise as a drone person and encouraged them to start their own program. So if you are a pilot in a school district, which everybody is, you definitely reach out and offer your insight to these schools, because it's a great way to get kids involved. Kind of my tagline has been, drones are the gateway drug to aviation. It's a great way to get kids involved in aviation, and aviation includes engineering and physics and all the great STEM disciplines. So check back in tomorrow, and I've got the request for credit, so I will take care of you guys tonight for your credit, and thank you very much for being here. Have a wonderful evening.